Hello, everybody. We're just letting everybody in and then we'll get started. So bear with us a couple of minutes while everybody just piles in the room. We had just under 200 registrations, which is amazing. So hopefully we've got a good audience joining us tonight. Appreciate everyone's giving us time on a school day. So thank you all. All right. Just another minute or so and we'll get started. Okay, so, well, first of all, good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us on our Vet Nurse Times Live in honour of Veterinary Nurse Awareness Month. And I think for many of us, VNAM is obviously an extremely important time of year. We can really showcase how important nurses are and kind of really show off our diversity of skills. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. So with me behind the scenes, I've got the wonderful Melissa, who's going to be monitoring our Q&As. So please do pop any of those into the chat box. And if we can answer anything as we go along, then we will do. But if not, there's plenty of time at the end of the session to answer all your questions, we hope. So just a very quick introduction for those of you who don't know me. I'm Emma and I'm an RVN. I've been in the profession now for over 20 years. I was clinical for most of my career. And also gained my ECC certificate in 2020. And whilst I'm still clinical where I can be, my full-time role is now as head of veterinary support here at Vet Times. So I'm also in the middle of my next certificate in veterinary leadership and management with the VMG, but I'm still very lucky that in my current role, even though I'm not in practice every day, I still get to work closely with members of the profession from a non-clinical standpoint. But at the end of the day, first and foremost, I am still an RVN at heart, always have been, always will be, and the profession is particularly close to my heart. My grandmother was a BVNA founding member and first sitting chairperson, so nursing really is a part of me, which is why I'm very proud to be able to fly the flag continuously where I can. But that's enough about me. I want to introduce you to these four wonderful people. So just like everybody to please give a warm welcome to Lee, Lindsay, and Helen. I'm sure most of you know exactly who they are, but for those of you who don't, just a very quick introduction to everybody. So we have the lovely Lee. So Lee's been in practice, in veterinary practice for 20 years now, and Lee has really championed the client journey and in particular the valuable role of nurses consultations. Lee is now head vet nurse at Your Vets in Sheldon, and her journey through leadership and personal growth has really shaped her passion for progression of others through teaching and coaching and mentorship. And on top of all of this, as well as being a mum of two, Lee is also studying for her PG cert in veterinary education, coaching and leadership. So we're really excited to have her with us and to share her insights. So thank you for being with us, Lee. So next we move on to Lindsay. Obviously, I'm sure most of you recognise Lindsay qualified as a veterinary nurse in 2013 and has quickly risen through leadership and management roles. Lindsay is now a small animal director at a busy hospital in Wiltshire, and she brings obviously the vital nurse perspective to the board. And beyond her practice role, obviously we know Lindsay as the current president of the BVNA, and she continues to be committed to supporting the continuous professional development of our nurses. So thank you, Lindsay. I know your time is very precious as well. And then next up is the wonderful Helen, who I have had the privilege of knowing for many years and has very much been a mentor and friend for some time now. And we know Helen's a passionate advocate for the nursing profession, and she's been instrumental in developing strategies for operational improvement and career pathways. And she's a current practice standards assessor for the RCVS. And Helen has an incredible background in veterinary nursing education. Oh, I can hear myself. Sorry, unmuted. Apologies for that. Hang on a second. I can hear myself. Yeah, so Helen obviously has an incredible background in nursing education and having set up a nursing college and becoming their head of centre, and with a BSc in veterinary nursing and business management. She's also currently working towards her MBA in clinical leadership. So just a few things to keep you busy, Helen. As always, we'd hate for you to be bored. And last but most certainly not least is fabulous Jack Pye. Many of you will know Jack and have probably seen him speak over the years. And Jack has carved an incredible path for himself over the years. He qualified in 2018 and his career led him from first opinion to emergency and critical care, where he achieved his ECC certificate. Jack is also taking on the Improve International Nursing Certificate in Diagnostic Imaging and is also a lecturer on the ultrasound modules. Jack is also an account manager for IMV Imaging. And so supports practices for all their imaging needs, and is well known, as I said, for sharing his expertise, particularly in ultrasonography, to support the development of nurses. So if anyone's able to catch any of his lectures or hear from him in person, then please make sure you grab the opportunity to do so. So he's got so much to share. So thank you so much, Jack, for being here as well. So now that I've introduced these four fabulous people, you're going to want to hear them talk and less of me. So I am going to just dive right in, and I think we're going to go in for the big juicy questions. And the first one is salaries. It's a very hot topic at the moment. I'm seeing lots of kind of comments among social media and murmurings in the profession of nurses feeling sort of really frustrated with salaries, and many wanting to leave the profession. They're sort of feeling really undervalued or a bit like they're a cog in a corporate machine, which is really sad. So let's get to it. So Lindsay, I'm going to come to you first, if I may. Obviously, we've seen a bit of an increase in salaries on offer in the past few years, sort of following one of the major vet groups' moves to start all their RVNs on 30,000 from qualifying. But this is still often quite unattainable for many practices, and the average salary in the UK still sits at around 26,000. So how do we tackle this in practice, in reality? Obviously, you are an RVN, you're also a director. There must be some quite tough conversations around this for you in practice.
Yeah, there is. And I'm in a position whereby I've been at points where I've been frustrated about nurse salary. When I first started out in practice, although qualified later, I've been in practice since for 20 years, and my starting salary was about £6,000. So yes, it's much better than it was, but it definitely needs to improve. But I'm the kind of person who's always asked why. And I'm now in a position where I understand the financials of a veterinary practice, and a lot of people might be unaware, but the salary bill is usually around about 50% of your turnover, and that's before any of your other costs come in, your overheads, etc. So as much as I now in my position would love to be able to pay my nurses substantially more, we have to look at where that money comes from. And I think we all have a responsibility to look at that. And it's really difficult sometimes, especially for nurses, because we don't go into a veterinary practice thinking of it as a business, but it is a business. And so to be able to generate more income for people, improve salaries, we've got to look at where we can draw that from. And there are things that we can do as nurses. So certainly, obviously, utilising nurses more in practice. And I know that some people might say, well, it's not for me to be utilised. Someone needs to give me those opportunities. And I disagree with that strongly, because I think as nurses, we're all accountable for that. And we can all look for those opportunities. And, there is a lot of misunderstanding around what nurses can and can't do in practice. But, we as nurses all have our code of conduct. We should be able to understand Schedule 3. Actually, it should be quite clear what we can and can't do. And it's just about having those conversations and actually, understanding as a clinical team what your team members can do. So with us, we have a skills matrix within our practice. We have training records. We know who is confident and competent to undertake which tasks. Obviously, we don't want everyone to feel like they have to do everything, because I've consult nurses who would not want to go into theatre, and I've got theatre nurses who would not want to go into consulting. But we do have to find those opportunities of where we can grow that income, and charging for nurses' time as well. So charging for our consults, for any of the things that we do within practice as well. And sometimes, certainly when we implemented that within our practice, actually the biggest obstacle were the more experienced nurses within our team that have always been used to being able to offer the level of care that we give and make that accessible to all of our clients. So it is it's difficult to make that change, isn't it, of this is how we've always done it, and actually might it mean that some people now can't access that. But we sort of turned it a little bit and actually thought, well, those people who genuinely are engaged in the treatment options that you're giving will pay for that. They value that service that they're getting from you. Whereas you would have, and I've experienced it, clients coming for weight clinics that would just come almost because they felt they had to, but weren't actually following any of the recommendation or advice that we've given. So it's just simply a waste of your time. So there are lots of things that we can do, and I appreciate, it is about growing the service. It is about recognizing as a nurse that you are a vital part and valuable part of the treatment plan for those patients, and having those conversations, approaching it with your leadership team, your management, looking at it from a business case perspective. So, if there is, you step back and look at your practice where there may be opportunities for you to put these processes in place, go to your leadership team with the idea and some potential solutions to that as well. Because often I think the other thing from a leadership perspective, sorry, I'm babbling on now, but from a leadership perspective, we're often faced with lots of decisions that we have to make throughout the day. It can be quite overwhelming. And if someone comes to you with a project that they want to do, but don't know how we're going to make that happen, haven't got any other ideas other than the fact that I just want to do this thing, actually having a think about it from a different perspective about the resource that might need to go into that, and how you can be part of pushing and driving that forward. And then the other thing I thought, actually, sorry, as I was talking then, is actually there's some really basic steps that we can do in practice. We can charge appropriately. So often we are so busy throughout our day that we might miss charges off invoices. So that's not increasing charges beyond what they should be, but for what we've done that day. And we have implemented within our practice some really basic checking mechanisms that people do once somebody's charged something up. And you'll be surprised at how much you capture when you put those systems in place. And so all of these things that we do can obviously help with increasing the profitability of the practice, which will in turn help to improve salaries. I hope I answered that. Sorry, I went a bit.
No, you did very much so. Thank you. It's really interesting. And you mentioned about the sort of the appropriate charging as well. And I know I've been guilty of it in the past in nurse culture. Oh, just do a quick nail clip, or, or just do this. Actually, if we really do prioritize charging for our time is worth it. And we have to make, we really have to prioritize that. We are vital members of the team, and we can drive that change. And Lee, I'll come to you next actually with this, because we do see a lot of these sort of comments and feelings potentially coming from nurses in corporate-owned practices. Obviously, you are a head nurse in a corporate structure, and just be interested to know, sort of from your point of view, have you sort of what initiatives or strategies have you kind of been part of or effectively put into place to sort of promote the transparency of and sort of fair wages for your nurses, while still ensuring that they're feeling valued? And that they're not just sort of quote unquote part of the corporate machine that we see people sort of feeling like at the minute.
Yeah, I get that. I get the corporate machine feeling, but I also sometimes it really depends on the local management, I think. I don't know about all the corporates, but ours, we have a specific career pathway. But it's what I found is, like, people expect career development in nursing just to be straight up leadership, but not everyone wants that or would be any good at that. So our career pathway sort of has layers of different nursing and different skill sets for different nurses, as you say, like surgical, consulting sort of specialisms, that sort of thing. So there's a bit like almost sideways development as well as upways. And then we have that's available to all nurses, so it sits on our sort of intranet thing alongside the salary bands, so they can see sort of the bands that are expected and sort of the skill sets that's required to sort of move up that, really. And I think we're from our point of view as leaders, we're sort of encouraged to have them conversations about salary and check-ins. I mean,
I think last year, the first year, where we did have a conversation literally with our nurses of, okay, coming up to salary review, because we do get an annual sort of salary review. What do you guys want? Like asking each individual nurse what they wanted, and it wasn't a guarantee that we could give them exactly what they wanted, but at least we kind of knew where their aspirations were, and we could help them sort of build towards that. So and they were very open to it, and I think it's important to have them discussions. Salary shouldn't be like a don't mention money like sort of thing. It's important to have open discussions about it. And so I think yeah, and we have access to a lot of CPD within our company that helps us build, that is designed to sort of sit in the career pathway. So we not only have a pathway, but we have a design of how to move within it, sort of thing. And we have things like that. There's a nurse committee and things. So it really helps to sort of it feels like our and I've seen other corporates, they're coming out with sort of nurse development programs and things, and it's nice that it's kind of shining a light on the how important a part, a brick in the wall that nurses are within sort of the industry. So yeah, so I think that sort of having that transparency and having them documents open and available to everyone and having open conversations is the best way for transparency, really. But like Lindsay said, it's staff costs are one of our, being on the sort of financial head is one of our biggest costs. So you do want to like promise the world, but you know there's only one person that's going to hit, and that's going to be your client. So it's that delicate balance, really.
Yeah, it is such a balance, isn't it? So Lindsay, you've just popped your hand up. You wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, so I completely forgot to mention, and Lee jogged my memory there as well, about transparency of salaries and salary banding is really important, that we adopt a culture where we don't shy away from sharing that information, along with sharing the financial information of the practice. So, sharing your balance sheet, your profit and loss, so that you can explain to your team members why and where we are at, so they've got a better overall understanding of the business, and taking the time to explain that. So I've worked in some practices before where they have sent that information out, but half the team don't really understand what that means and what that equates to. So again, involving the team members and having that transparency, as Lee's mentioned.
And I think it's discussing sort of reward for skills and attitude as well. Not just, I've worked in practices where sort of reward has been blanket one sort of across the board, but when you're sort of slogging your guts out versus someone who is clocking in and clocking out, it has to be very personal to each other, I feel.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I think Jack, I'll pop over to you actually. This sort of we see this comment that's been flown around lately, we are the cheap mini vets, and that's just makes us all a little bit angry, I think, doesn't it? And obviously these kind of comments are continuing to contribute to this kind of feeling around it. And obviously you've built you've grown your career from the back of your love of one aspect of nursing in diagnostic imaging and in ECC, and obviously you're so passionate about supporting others with that. And kind of what advice would you give to nurses looking to maybe specialize and grow a section of their practices? How would you encourage them to start kind of carving their own path? Because that's really empowering for them, and that, as touching on what Lee and Lindsay said, that kind of gives an additional incentive to build their own practice, essentially.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So first of all, I would say not to force it, because when I was a student, when I recently, soon after, I sort of was part of like social media and seeing other vet nurses on there, other vets and stuff like that, and it was a lovely sort of thing to see people sharing their information and bits and pieces like that, and some people really had their own sort of niche area that they loved, and I was like, well, I don't have one. What's mine? And I kind of felt like a bit of I was a bit wrong, and I probably haven't really done my training properly because I didn't have a specific area that I loved, and I tried to really force it, and I was like, I do like anesthesia and I do like exotics and stuff like that. So, and then I really tried to force it, but I was just like, I don't actually really love these things. So, and there is that cliche thing of like, it'll happen when it happens, basically. So and when you least expect it sometimes. And I mean, even if I was a student now and you told me ultrasound was going to be my area of interest, I literally would laugh. And I share this in some of my lectures sometimes, because when the vets used to need a hand with ultrasound, I would actively hide in the practice and try to make myself look busy doing something else, because I was like, I don't want to stand in a dark room looking at a fuzzy grey image. And then, but actually the reason I didn't want to is because I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea what was on the screen. It didn't sort of interest me, because I was like, I feel like I'm just restraining a patient for sort of half an hour while she faff around with a machine fiddling some buttons. It wasn't until I actually carried out ultrasound myself and actually done some CPD on what was going on the screen that actually then my passion was like ignited from there, pretty much. And when I went back into practice, I was very lucky that the hospital that I was in is very encouraging of our CPD when we do it, when we go back into practice, to actually put it into practice rather than tick a box and you've got a few hours CPD. Like, go in, and we also do this at IMB. If there's any CPD that we do, we go back to the team and we kind of present what we've learned and how it can benefit people and bits and pieces like that, rather than it just sitting there and you not actually doing anything with it. By doing that, the vets then got on board and were sort of like, oh, you actually can do this and you do know what you're talking about. And then they started to delegate it to me. So it kind of was just like those series of events of being in a really sort of supportive practice and being able to sort of put it in sort of good use sort of from there. But in terms of doing it, you need to find what sort of ignites your passion, really. Everything, like, you know, if you told me that I had to go and sit in theatre all day and do anaesthetics, I would be like, oh, for God's sake, like, really, sort of thing. You know, there's certain things that, and it's not for everyone. Some people love consulting, some people love theatre, some people love imaging, some people love behaviour, and, you know, there's literally something for everyone, and you can't force people into doing what they don't want to do. But when they do find their passion, then having a practice that will support them through it is just, you know, that they'll remember that, and they'll sort of stay and sort of be loyal to the practice, probably, unless you're like me and then you decide to sod off and follow a different pathway. But that has obviously followed on to the account management and commercial role that I do now, which I kind of have the best of both worlds, really, because I do a commercial role where I can help quite a lot of people in a sort of larger territory with their imaging sort of needs and sort of CPD and teaching them. But I'm quite lucky that the company that I work for are also very pro sort of vet nurses and sort of upskilling and CPD and all that sort of stuff as well. But I actually get a day a month where I can go in and do clinical practice without having to take holiday days. So just little things like that mean that I still get to keep my hand into clinical, because I absolutely love the clinical work. I wouldn't be able to step away from it completely, because I would literally miss it too much. So yeah.
Oh no, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And Helen, I'm going to come to you last on this sort of area. Obviously, as a PSS assessor, you kind of see practice all over the country. And have you, what the sort of the common areas where you've seen practices excel in kind of really involving and empowering their nurses, and are there, at the same time, are there any sort of really frequently missed opportunities that you've come across?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I have to make a slight correction, I'm only south of England, so I don't go all over the country, but nearly.
Yeah, where you cover.
Yeah, I hear about the stories as well. So nurse utilisation is quite a hot topic, and you can get really geeky about, you know, spreadsheets and numbers and who's doing what and how are we dividing up the work that needs to be done in the practice. And I was thinking about how to phrase this and the opportunities we have and the missed opportunities, and really they're the same kind of thing. So I think, you know, key areas that nurses can really work in and utilise our skills are things like consulting. So nurse consults are really key to running a successful practice in many cases. And I appreciate there can be limitations in terms of space, you know, having a nurse consult room or availability. But assuming that you've got facilities to do that, then it's a really good idea to get nurses involved in healthcare, preventive healthcare, management of diseases, vaccinations, just having client conversations about, you know, they're diabetic, or teaching an owner of a diabetic patient to give injections. so I think that's like a key clinical area if I had to pick one. I also think diagnostic imaging is another area. You know, Jack's living proof that you can build a really successful career around empowering nurses to deliver diagnostic imaging. And I think I might be speaking out of turn, but I think it is general experience. You know, radiography and ultrasonography are things that people sometimes struggle with or feel a bit more reluctant to get involved with because it can be quite daunting. But that said, you know, it's a really key area that we have nurses that are RPSs now, really taking ownership of managing the safety of radiation in the practice, and also that can transfer into clinical skills, and it's something that we can do. I quite like setting up for x-rays and taking exposures and that kind of thing. So there's those kind of areas. And then also I think, you know, one of the benefits of the corporatization of the industry is that that really strong clinical leadership availability that we have now that we didn't necessarily have when we were sort of a lot of private smaller practices. So there's a real opening for nurses to really be involved in running the practices as well and using our clinical skills, but to build the business. And sorry, I can't turn my notifications off. Apologies. I'm having a Teams moment at the moment. So there's this real opportunity to get us involved in using our clinical skills in leading the practice, leading the team, and making sure that we're making sound commercial decisions which support the team and the development of future nurses alongside that.
Yeah. No, and that probably kind of brings us nicely onto the next day. So I can see some comments coming in on the chat, which I'll get to in a second. But Lindsay, I'll just circle back to you. Obviously now kind of putting your president's cap on maybe, and in light of you know, for example, the possible outcome of with the recommendations from the CMA investigation towards the end of the year. Obviously that's potentially going to really influence the future role and recognition of nurses, which we hope will obviously in turn then bring about the overhaul of the Veterinary Surgeons Act. We've kind of been going around the block a lot with what may arise, kind of opportunities for the nurses, but other things that we can start doing now that can prepare us for this. You know, what do we think? I mean, we all kind of have a bit of an idea of what's going to come, but kind of in your opinion, what does that maybe look like from BVNA perspective? How can we start preparing for that now?
Yeah, so just to give a bit of background, not everybody might be aware that BVNA has been one of the key stakeholders of the CMA from the very beginning of their investigation. And so we've been part of, alongside BVA, we attended a teach-in where we talked to the CMA about, you know, the profession, any concerns that we had, where we felt that we needed to go with it. We had a roundtable with them where we invited members, BVNA members, to come along and be part of that. And actually, it was a really diverse group of nurses. It actually felt like, I have to say, it's one of the best things I've been part of. It was a room of really empowering, engaged nurses, all from different backgrounds, all working in different areas, utilising their nursing qualification, you know, some leadership, business, charities, education. And it was really great to show the CMA exactly the breadth of what veterinary nurses can do. It's not all necessarily just clinically working in practice. And so we also had a hearing with them in March where we again, you know, approached those concerns that were raised all along the way. And you know, really great things are coming out of it. You know, it's really helping to highlight veterinary nurses and what we do. And I think, you know, a lot of the stuff coming out of it is really favourable towards nurses. It's really raising the profile of veterinary nurses. You know, we've talked about nurse utilisation, which is a, you know, a huge prominent topic at the moment. And I have to say, I think that a lot of that has come from the CMA review and us all talking about it and then raising it as well. There are things obviously along, you know, protection in the title is fundamentally huge and something that we, you know, campaigned for and nurses have wanted for some time. And you mentioned looking at a potential new Veterinary Surgeons Act. And again, at the moment, it might not be, I can't say a great deal about it, but again, BVNA and BVA are key stakeholders working with DEFRA, and we've been doing it since January. We've had twice weekly meetings running up to August, pulling together new draft legislation, and veterinary nurses' voices are heard through every stage of looking at what new legislation might be. So it's not just necessarily the section on veterinary nurses, but it's actually how all elements of the Veterinary Surgeons Act should be inclusive of veterinary nurses. And they're probably pretty sick of me saying, what about nurses, throughout every single meeting. They now sort of sheepishly look when they maybe haven't put RVN next to vet in a bit of their text. So, you know, I feel really positive that there is so much work being done towards that. It's still obviously going to take time, but we are already taking those proactive steps behind the scenes. It's just we can't talk about the content of it. But certainly what we can do now is be really encouraged by the platform that veterinary nurses have been given, and really take this opportunity to shape within our own workplaces, and, you know, really engaging each other in pushing stuff forward. I think we might have lost Emma.
I don't know if Melissa's on here as well, who is running it.
Sounds like Emma might be trying to come back in.
Okay. I'll just drop her a message as well and just see if she's coming. Oh.
She's probably having to restart or log on.
Yeah.
Well, what a thing to happen when you're live, eh?
Oh, bless her.
It sounds like her.
I'm hoping it wasn't something I said.
I have to apologise to the wider nation. This has been an ongoing issue, so many apologies. Sorry for that. I will swiftly pick back up where Lindsay just very kindly left off there. Thank you. Yeah, it's a really obviously protecting the title is obviously where we really hope that this is going to end up, and obviously it's encouraging to see the human nurse title has obviously just been protected, which is fantastic. So hopefully we are next in line, and as long as we all continue to sort of keep working together and campaigning for this, and it just brings me on to sort of a last point, particularly before I see all the questions are kind of rolling in. So I want to make sure that we get to answer some of those. But Helen, I'm going to pop back round to you. Obviously, with in your role as an assessor, part of your role is to ensure the compliance with the RCVS standards. You know, also in regards to staffing and qualifications, and we often do still hear concerns about unqualified nurses, kind of including those that maybe have trained overseas, who are being allowed to perform Schedule 3 procedures. Obviously, as we've just discussed, it's legally complex, obviously, until the title is protected. Sort of how crucial is it for senior leadership to really champion the correct delegation of these procedures, and obviously we need to address this kind of ongoing compliance or lack thereof of the situation in practice, because this will all be contributing to nurses potentially not feeling valued, because, you know, in no uncertain terms they feel, oh well, if anybody can do it, why, you know, it's just a really, what's your take on how we tackle this?
Yeah, so my take is that the legal protection of the title of veterinary nurse, obviously that is under review at the moment, and so I think that it's positive that veterinary nurses are being seen, we're being heard. The CMA have an understanding of our role and where the legislation hasn't quite caught up with modern day nursing. If you think about the age of the legislation and the amount of changes that have happened in veterinary practices since then. I mean, I'm sort of 29 years this year. I know I don't look at in the industry, and I think about the changes that have been made in that time. It's phenomenal. So, you know, we need this legislation to catch up with modern practice. That said, the bit that certainly to my mind is is very well legislated, and there's a lot of information about who is able to partake in Schedule 3 activities and who's responsible for that. So if you think about the resources that we have for that, we have the RCVS has produced a superb poster and information around it. It's not just a poster, it very clearly sets out how to make decisions about delegation. And there's also the codes of professional conduct as well for both veterinary nurses and veterinary surgeons. And thinking about people who aren't regulated, so non-regulated, non-qualified individuals potentially undertaking Schedule 3 procedures, it's really key that that leadership within a practice understand their responsibilities and what is actually allowed to happen legally and what isn't. And at the moment, it is always the veterinary surgeon's responsibility to make sure that tasks are delegated to the right people with the right experience. And that goes further than just having a qualification or being registered. It's also, are you competent, confident? Do you have the right support to develop that skill and then utilise it in practice? So it's really key. And I think at the moment we are at a point where we have a lot of opportunity, and there's going to be changes coming which hopefully will work to reinforce the role of nurses and to make sure that everybody has a better understanding of who can do what.
No, thank you so much for that. And I mean, obviously, all of Jack's work in diagnostic imaging, that's not an act of veterinary surgery. There's no reason for that nurses can't really take control of that. I'm just going to pop over to the chat because I'm conscious of time, and we've got some really interesting comments coming through. And there's one here says additional training sadly does not mean an increase in pay. I have a certificate in anaesthesia and analgesia and have completed several imaging courses, and like Jack, I love it. I assist with vets with scanning, offer a scan service. Skills has not led to any kind of pay increase. Jack, I don't know if that's sort of potentially your area. I don't know if you had any comments or if anyone opened the floor up to anybody really. It's a tough one.
I think if I was in practice and I was in that situation, like when I was doing scans and stuff like that, and hopefully you're actively charging for them as well, because if they're seeing you and having a scan, then if they were seeing a vet and having a scan, they'd certainly be being charged for it, and you're not doing a different job at all. You can pass comment on what you're observing. You're not making diagnosis and stuff from there, as we've probably covered in sort of quite a few lectures and stuff like that. So you are income generating there, and whilst you're income generating as by doing those scans, there's a vet that's then also income generating elsewhere in the practice because you're doing their scan. You're not taking that vet away. So if it was me, I'd probably go over the course of a couple of months and keep a tally of what you're generating income wise, probably even buddy it up with a vet and then show what they're income generating whilst you're doing that as well, and just sort of put the figures there. But similarly to what people have been mentioning about salaries, it's not necessarily as straightforward as that. And I know that's easy for me to say now I'm not in practice, but similarly, as sort of Lindsay says, you need to be able to have them transparent conversations with your leadership people that are there in terms of actually what is sustainable for the practice, because the last thing you want is to have a lovely salary increase, which would be absolutely delightful for everyone, but then in 3 months then turn around to you and say, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to make some staff redundant because we aren't running a sustainable business, which then is going to have a much bigger impact on your livelihood. So I don't know what the answer is. I wish there was like a magic answer to be like, great, let's pay all the nurses like a certain sort of salary, because I mean we all have that, but we also need that to we work to live. I've always said that I want to work to live. I don't want to live to work. But it's such a tricky financial climate at the moment as well.
No, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's I really like the idea of essentially making a business case and evidence. We're a profession that loves evidence base, so let's use that to our advantage. Let's gather our evidence and let's present that and present it like a business plan. So there's
I just saw a comment saying my charge is half of what the vet charges. I don't know if that's in relation to the scan, but if it is, I would be asking the question, why is it half of what the vet charges? If it's the same scan as what you'll carry out. If it's a full abdominal scan and you're doing you're going really into depth, versus a pregnancy scan. If it's a pregnancy scan, it's a pregnancy scan. I think we should be charging appropriately. So
absolutely, yeah, no, completely agree. And that again goes back to Lindsay's comment earlier of appropriate charging, and making a case for where that's coming from. Lindsay, sorry, just you raised your hand there.
Yeah, it was just to come back in on the business plan things. I've used that multiple times. So an example is in a practice I worked at, the nursing team used to do the out of hours, and it was having an impact on what we could do the next day, because we'd have a nurse off the day before and a nurse off the day afterwards. So I put a business proposal together for implementing out of hours nurses. I wasn't in a management position at that point, but recognised that actually that this would have a positive impact on the business, because we would be able to ensure that we had nurses on the ground to be able to do stuff during the day, and a separate night team that would focus purely on the inpatients and emergency care. And similarly, in my role now, I wanted to go up nurses. I had to put a business case together for the rest of the board as to why I'm going to do that. This is so that we could undertake more frequent Schedule 3 surgeries. So I needed to go up nurses, and I needed to show how we were going to cover those costs. So, a lot of it is about making it so that it is, like I said before, going to whoever it is within your decision maker within your practice and you might not have it spot on, because we're veterinary nurses, so we don't know necessarily how to do business plans, but with some form of idea that they can help you work with to get those numbers right. But rather than just saying it's not happening, what can you do as a veterinary nurse? What can you do as an individual to make, to help encourage this and drive this change forward?
No, that's a really interesting, a really positive way to look at it. And I suppose, Lee, obviously you're undertaking your certificate, and you're so passionate about development and developing yourself. Is this something that you encourage your nurses to do as well? And kind of how well is that all received within the corporate structure? There are some comments coming here through about working for different groups, so I'll just mention those in a second, but just be interesting to get your take on that from within a corporate group.
Yeah, well, my girls know that I sort of, if they haven't used their CPD budget, we're heading to the end of the year, I'm like, come on, you've got this is one of your benefits. Use it. I don't care what you use it on. Just go out there, polish some skills, enjoy yourself. Because I think it really brings a buzz back when someone's been on a course and they've found out a really good how we can all improve as a team. And then if nurses, particularly like one of our girls loves wounds, and she did a wound course and she was enthusiastic, but because it's good to bring stuff back and teach the team and improve the team. But for example, for her, she wasn't someone who could do a presentation to the rest of the group. So I was like, fine, let's get someone in. So we had somebody come in and do wound care, and the team loved it, and it empowered us all as a team. So all the nurses were we've still got her as our sort of go-to girl if we go, oh, I can't remember quite what about that wound, but it empowered us as a team, and that was really nice that we were all on the same journey together. So I think it's spreading the knowledge between yourselves, but also empowering each other to get on board. I think it's all good going to a CPD and learning something, but keeping it to yourself isn't gonna put it into practice really, and you need to use it before you lose it basically. So have a solutions focus and kind of sort of try and draw it in as a team and communicate with your vets as well as your nurses as well.
No, that's amazing. Thank you so much. I've got a question here from Kirsty, who says, I'm a head nurse at a practice which has a lot of vets, so it can be really challenging for the nurses to develop their skills. The vets don't need to refer clinics to nurses. They all have operating, so that only really confident nurses get to do Schedule 3 procedures. How can I make my nurses feel more valued? I'm just going to open that up to the floor for any opinions you might have on that. It's tough when you've got I've worked in practices where you've got some very headstrong kind of younger vets that are just determined and want to do everything, but you've also got some very capable nurses that are more than able to do that. So it's difficult to strike the balance, isn't it? So if anyone wants to jump in.
This is why you need nurses in leadership roles. I massively advocate for that in practice, because I think you need to have perspective from all team members on your leadership, whether that's a board of directors or whether that's a practice manager, nurse manager, and clinical director. But I think, again, it's flipping it back to that, how can we increase the profit margins of your practice? And by having nurses able to undertake the tasks that we can and we should be doing, it allows vets to be opened up to focus on the things that nurses can't do. And it's really tricky to navigate. And I've been in this situation. It's really useful if you can find a vet that is very pro nurse as well. If there's somebody within your practice that you can have those conversations with, so that you can come at it from the two different perspectives, but obviously, same voice, same message, sorry, that's being heard there. I think it's really, really useful. And often it's having those conversations, actually having a team meeting and understanding. It might be that it's not necessarily that the vets enjoy doing it. We had a conversation with somebody and said, that nurses can do ear flushes, and they were like, oh, thank God, I don't want to do it anymore. So it might be a level of understanding between the team. It might be that you perceive that they really enjoy doing those things, but in actual fact, they're just a little unclear as to what they can and can't do. So I think having an open communication, having a team conversation about it, and just getting out there. They might not realise. I mean, you might have said it to them already, but they also might not realise that actually it's causing bother for the nurses, and they feel undervalued and disengaged from nursing. So I just open up those conversations.
Yeah, it's so important to have such transparency of communication with all of this going on. And I think that's where we find a lot of potentially kind of toxic thoughts and toxic energy comes in between, if you've got one person who's feeling particularly upset about something but doesn't use the right channels to communicate that, it kind of perpetuates and becomes a big concern. So I think as you say, where we can communicate and openly talk about things, as Lee said earlier as well, just keep it transparent and keep it open. So there's another interesting comment here that says, I feel like there's not enough nurses in true decision-making roles in my company, and that affects the nurse on the ground. They're all either MRCVS or some sort of other non-veterinary related corporate. So again, I think that touches back to nurses and leadership, and really encouraging us to take that stance. If we're feeling frustrated with that, then why don't we carve our own paths and do that ourselves? So yeah, any comments on that?
I think there's definitely a lot more leadership roles there for vet nurses now than there was even 5 years ago. I think there's still a long way to go, absolutely, but there's definitely roles there now that you see coming up, even if it's in individual practices. So, or whether it's actually sort of more across sort of the corporate board as well. So that's actually really nice to see. I do, since going into sort of the role that I'm in now, and sort of we focus heavily sort of on leadership anchors, is actually like proper leadership training as well, rather than having the person who's been qualified for the longest go into a leadership position. That doesn't always mean it's the best fit for that person. And also, don't just go to leadership training when you're then a leader. Go to it before. Get yourself prepared. See if that's the pathway you enjoy. Start it years before, because then you've got the skill set and the toolbox that you need to actually go into that leadership position. So I've been on the back end of people being in leadership positions that have purely been there because they've been at the practice the longest, or they're the longest qualified, not because actually they want to do it. So yeah.
No, and I remember my first head nurse role. I was not qualified to do that job, and I very distinctly remember kind of navigating that and going, what am I doing? This is very nice to be respected and be asked to, but I should not be doing this job. And it's only now that I'm in more of a leadership position, I can look back to myself 10 years ago and you kind of go, hang on a second. So it's really that's a really, really key point, is get involved in that sooner. And if you think that that's something you enjoy, then focus on that. Lee, you've got your hand up there as well, and Lindsay. Oh, Lee, you're still unmuted, sorry.
It was just to say, like, when I spoke about the career pathway earlier, I forgot to mention they've diverted into like a clinical lead and a team lead, because wanting to lead doesn't necessarily mean wanting to lead people. You might be more clinical based. So seeing these roles crop up that are different, because I saw a good quote about leading for impact rather than ego. And I think back in the day, people did go into leadership because it was the only way that you could go. And some of the wrong people landed their roles. Whereas now with the clinical lead and the team lead roles cropping up, it's nice that people can sort of lead, but through their clinical skills and embrace the clinical aspects that the nurses can bring as well.
Absolutely, completely agree with you. I've just got another raised hand. Sorry, Lindsay, I will come to you in a second from Kim. I think there's a Kim raising hand. If you wanted to can you jump in? Can you unmute yourself at all to ask your question? I don't know, Mel, if you're able to see that. Are we able to? Well, you might need to pop it in the chat. I don't know if we've lost Kim. Oh no, hang on, here we go. Oh, accidental race. No problem. Lindsay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to follow on from what Jack and Lee had said, really. You know, I know a lot of very good nurses that were coerced into head nurse roles and ended up actually either leaving the profession temporarily or, you know, having a detrimental impact on sort of how they viewed themselves as a nurse. And you know, I've been in that situation as well. I was good at rotas, so I was made a head nurse, and I didn't have the necessary leadership skills. So it is really useful now that there is so much support for leadership training for nurses, or it's much more accessible than it was. But the other thing I think is, as nurses, we doubt ourselves massively. You know, I was which I think, you know, I don't want to say that's not the case for vets, but I was asked to be one of the directors in 2018, and I spent 5 or 6 years always saying, I'm really lucky that they've given me this opportunity. And I used to, you know, that the vets have allowed me to be able to do this, rather than seeing actually the skill set that I brought to it. So I think, again, it's, you know, nurses in leadership roles that are supported with adequate training, but the support is the fundamental thing there, isn't it?
Absolutely, completely agree with it. I don't know if Helen, did you have anything else to add on that at all?
I had a fleeting geeky thought about identity leadership. So this is actually common amongst medical, as in human medics, and nurses, as well as veterinary teams. Excuse me. And so, yeah, so the identity leadership is all about identifying yourself as a leader and growing your leadership skills as well as a clinical skill set. So quite often the people who get promoted or put forward into leadership roles are done so because they have a really good clinical background and they're very competent clinicians. However, we also know that involves sometimes people who are reluctant to be leaders, just feeling like they have to, or being sort of pushed or maneuvered into a role, and then we lose those kind of clinical leadership skills from the floor, and so it can be problematic. So I think for me, having reflected on that, I think the key thing is if you feel like leadership is part of your journey, is to start learning about it, as we said before you come to that, and actually thinking about early careers. You know, the first person or the first thing that you lead in your job role when you first start your professional career is yourself. So really think about that. You lead yourself, you move on to leading others, then you move on to leading the business. So it's really important as nurses that we recognise where our skill sets need to be developed, that we understand that because we're really competent clinically doesn't mean we're really competent leaders, and neither should we be to start with. So Emma, you were talking about your first leadership role, and I had a similar situation when I first started teaching, and I kind of went in and I expected to be really good at teaching because I was a good nurse, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, and it's a whole new skill set. So you know, we're not taught leadership from the get-go. There's an argument maybe that should be included a bit earlier in our careers, but again, thinking about the corporate structures that we now have available, and you know, there's pros and cons to corporates. I'm not here to pick a particular side, but one of the pros, if you want to be a leader, is that most corporates have these kind of really good leadership skills, and you get the mentors as well from watching your seniors, and that's another bit of advice that I would give, is find yourself good mentors. Like, really think about when you're planning your professional development, who do I want to mentor me, what sort of skills do I want to develop, and go and talk to people. You know, most of us really want to help other people. We're in a very nurturing vocational profession, and ask for people's time, ask if you can buy them a coffee, ask if you can have half an hour, or just keep trying to access the people that you want to learn from, and asking the right questions.
That's it, exactly. I was always reminded of Katie Ford, who says, be curious, the questions, and that always just kind of sits with me, and I think that's a really important thing to take away. And equally, when you're leading your teams, I think that's something that I've kind of learned over the years. It's kind of, well, what would you like to do? What, tell me, and how can we help you get there? There's an interesting comment here that just that I've just seen from Hamish, who says, I think we need to push back against any non-clinical role that says must be RCVS. I love that. I think that's amazing. And obviously myself, Helen, Jack, Lindsay, in your other hat, we're all lead, and Lindsay, and Lee now going in with your certificate as well. We're all in non-clinical, we all take on these non-clinical aspects, and we have so many transferable skills that are so vital in so many other aspects of the profession. I think absolutely, let's push back when it says must be RCVS, because there are we're pretty good at what we do, and we there's so much that we can bring to the table. Just going to have another quick scan of these comments. Thank you so much, everybody, for all of these. There's some I wish we could chat through every single one. There's one here from Cass, who says, it saddens me to read a lot of these comments. It sounds like a lot of practices need to up their game when it comes to their culture and value for their nurses, which is a huge thing that we're seeing a lot. I don't know if anyone's got any comments on Cass's point there.
I think it depends how the vets also convey the nurses to their clients and the people that you see come through the doors. I'm quite lucky. There's a clinic that I help out sort of locally, and I'll go in and do ultrasound scans for them, because she actively realizes that someone else is better suited to do that sort of for her. But the way that she introduces me as a nurse to the clients, for one, where you're standing there, we're not very good at like blowing our own trumpet at all. But when you've got a vet who is blowing your trumpet to your clients then see the value of the person that's then sort of doing things with their pet. So if you've got vets in practice who are pro nurse, and then get them to advocate it to your clients, essentially. There's so many people who used to say that I'm just going to take it down the back, like to prep. What does that mean? Like, clients have no perspective of what down the back in prep is, that they're actually going to go and get a registered veterinary nurse to help with your patient's care. So yeah, if you have got vets in practice, what language are they using is probably quite important. I think we might have lost Emma again.
Yeah. I was just going to come in and say there, Jack, that I absolutely agree with you with that as well. And I think from a cultural point of view, there's things that could be done early on in the training of both vets and nurses. I think I put it in the comments about interprofessional learning, and I know that some universities are doing that now, but certainly the culture and the practice needs to be that we look at things from a team-based approach. And using your example there, is actually sometimes it might mean that the nurse is better equipped or better skilled, better trained to undertake that particular task, and that it's symbiotic. We need the vets, we need the nurses, but there's elements of the patient aftercare that the nurses are really good at, and the vets don't have the time to do. So, embracing the team-based approach to any kind of treatment, I think, is really quite helpful.
Yeah. Oh, you're on mute, Emma. She's frozen. I see someone put, how do you encourage your vets to be pro nurse? And I don't know, you can't always change everybody. Unfortunately, all you can do is try and educate them to the best of your ability. I had vets in the practice when I was doing ultrasound scan who I never thought would delegate it to me at all. But once they started to see how it benefited the patient care and outcomes, that it was like the penny dropped. So it's just trying to educate them, I think, and show them how it benefits. Sometimes how it benefits them, you kind of have to not sell it to them, because we shouldn't really be able to do that. But if you can make something someone else's idea, sometimes they're like, oh, what a great idea, sort of thing. So, and then it sort of follows on from there.
Yeah, I agree. And it's lack of confidence as well, isn't it? Sometimes I think, or lack of understanding. So it's like you say, it goes back to that communication piece again. Sorry, I jumped in, Helen.
No, I was just going to say it's about figuring out what works for that person as well. It's quite an individual approach. So one vet might appreciate it if you say, look, I can do these second vaccine consults, and this is how much time it's going to save you in your day. On somebody else, it might be talking about, you know, what's the blockers here. You know, with curiosity is really key, but also understanding motivational aspects of this, and dealing with someone one-on-one, and really finding out what makes them tick and what appeals to them. It might be financial, it might be resource, you know, time, resources, or it might be, actually, did you realise that I really enjoy doing this, and maybe they haven't. So and again, that feeds into leading yourself as a priority here. So as much as, you know, we've all had situations where, you know, you kind of go into work and you think, oh, you know, here we go. It can feel like a bit of a battle at times. It's about checking you, making sure that you kind of regroup yourself, and that you go in positively and seek to understand first, and so you think to understand and then to be understood as a basis for your conversations around this kind of thing.
I think that's a really, really good point, because often people get quite defensive or frustrated, don't they? And they don't actually ask the why, or, you know, how, or, you know, is that person okay? Do they understand? So I think that's a really, really valuable point to take.
Emma really is having a moment, isn't she, with her internet?
I guess Emma's not coming back, so I'll kind of wrap it up. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight, and thank you for lovely questions as well. It was a pleasure to have you all. And yeah, we'll send the recording tomorrow after this all concludes, and yeah, you can kind of view it again and come back to it. But yeah, thank you so much all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, Emma's back.
Oh.
I'm so sorry, everybody. I cannot tell you how embarrassing this is. I'm really sorry.
Okay, it happens.
Yeah.
Because of technology, but look, just obviously all of you for joining us. I cannot thank you enough, and thank you for for coming on, and thank you to everybody who joined in and who listened. Obviously this will be available as a recording soon, and yes, just huge thank you, and speak to you all soon. Have a lovely rest of your evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
bye.